Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. Before you begin this video, or before I begin this video and you'd like to use OCD Recovery's coaching services, please reach out to Phil at ocdrecovery.com and he'll get back to you as quick as he can. Yeah, so today guys, I just wanted to speak about losing yourself and trying to find your true self. And I just wanted to explain how there's some inaccurate labels around this, all right? So I get it, when you're going through chronic OCD, it's going to feel like that you're no longer that person you once knew. And it's all because of how OCD mimics the core fear. It's going to feel like you are living that experience. You're living that thing that you're afraid of. And it feels like that you aren't maybe the person that you thought you was. All right. And of course, when that does happen, it feels very unsettling. It feels very disturbing. And we want to get back to that original state of how he was. We almost have that internal chase and that internal monitoring of, when's this going to go? When am I going to go back to how I was before? And that fear angle really creeps in there. All right. So, yeah, as I said, with this video, it's important to realize that you can't really lose yourself. All right. And let's break this down in several ways. So when you say that you lose yourself, right, you're saying that there's something to find, that there's something to search for, that you need to figure this thing out, you need to fix it. And of course, when you're trying to figure out what that is, who you are, that takes us down the route of compulsions, because it's that chase for certainty. I need to find out, I need to know who I am. And like I said, it's going to feel like we are completely different to how we was before OCD set in. But OCD holds all the cards when we try and get that certainty about who we are, when we try and really get that idea of who we are, right? And, it's going to feel like we're living a lie. It's going to feel like we aren't who we thought we was. It's going to feel so alien. But that internal pursuit, that internal chase to find yourself in many ways is just going to keep us stuck, right? And then as well with this, right, even in defining the self, right, we're so complex. We have so many traits. We have so many acts. We have so many characteristics. Even coming up with a final definition of the self in a moment in our lives is going to oftentimes be very inaccurate. There's lots of parts about me that I don't really know about myself yet. How do I know that I don't have this specific trait? How do I know that I haven't got X, Y, Z until I come across that situation in my life? I've got a rough idea about the certain things about me, but of course I don't know everything about me, because I've not been in every position or every situation that is going to warrant me finding out those things about myself, right? So you've got to see it like that as well. All we're better off of doing is rating ourselves by certain acts, these traits and characteristics, rather than the whole self, right? Because when we're saying, oh, I've lost my entire self, well, if that was possible, the reality is that you probably haven't lost your entire self, right? You still probably look similar to the way you do before OCD set in. You probably still have some characteristics and traits and interests that you do retain. And even with that as well, even on the recovery journey, as I've got better, I've evolved and grown and changed so much over time that I'm by default not the same person that I was before OCD set in. Not only due to the aging process, but due to sort of cultural factors, environmental factors, genetic factors, moving to different places, exploring different cultures. We very much take that with us, and we sort of use that, we take those things with us, and as a result of that we change. Even being around other people, we can change. Being with a partner, you're going to adopt some of those mannerisms. If you live with somebody as well, you're going to adopt their mannerisms as well. So we're constantly this ever-changing process by default anyway. So to say that you could even say in that regard, we're always by default losing ourselves, right? There's nothing to really there's nothing to really figure out or obtain, because we're always a moving target. And as I said, we're just undergoing that natural transition on a day-to-day basis. So you've got to sort of thinking of it as, yep, I've lost myself, I've found myself. I know it feels like that. I know it feels so real in the moment. But like I said, when you're trying to figure that out, it gets us down to the certainty and the compulsive route as we try and figure that out. And like I said before, just by virtue of getting older and all the different experiences, we are going to change and evolve. It's like a lot of my interests have changed since I've gone through OCD recovery. For example, I'm not as into football as I once was. I of course do still like football, but you could say that I lost a part of me in that regard as I became more rational. I don't tend to associate with things that are as irrational anymore. It's just my personal preference. Maybe that's why my interest in football has died down, because of the irrationality of it with everything that goes on. And yeah, there's also other parts that I've lost from that regard too, and some for the better, right? So maybe I was, or no, not maybe, I was very insecure. I was scared of rejection. I was scared of putting my first foot forward. And you could say that I've also lost those parts of me too. But I'm actually thankful that I have lost those parts of me, because they got me into that position in the first place, all right? So, you know, losing yourself, finding yourself, it doesn't have to be an inherently bad thing that maybe we do lose certain traits and characteristics about ourselves, all right? You know, there can actually be many benefits to that, because I wouldn't want to be the same person that I was that got me into OCD, because that same thinking got me into that, like I said. And it's actually quite exciting to know that we are this process, and you know, there isn't a button you can sort of press at a certain point in time and say, yep, you're that, you're going to be fixed with that forever. No, we're so complex and always adapting these new beliefs and behaviors that it probably makes it you know, futile to say that we are losing ourselves or that we are finding ourselves. So again, like I said, I know it's going to feel with the fear in OCD and how it mimics that we have lost ourselves, but again, it's not about that. It's about the perspectives, about the worst case scenarios. It's about the perspectives of the core fears that are really latched in there, and what we need to try and change with persistence and practice over a long period of time. And yeah, like I said, you know, you're going to have to run the risk that on the recovery journey, you are going to maybe not be the person that you thought you was. And you are going to have to run the risk of maybe your certain interests or beliefs and behaviours changing over a long period of time, because that's the only way to get better. And those same rigid black and white beliefs that you may have towards a certain theme or other things in life, more than likely, you may have to take the risk of losing yourself a little bit, if that does exist, in order to recover. So it can feel quite uncertain. It can feel like, you know, there's that massive fear angle. What if I don't go back to that person who I thought I was? What if I lose this part of me? What if, you know, me and my partner separate because of that, and because I change or because they change? Or what if in my case as well, what if my sexuality isn't the thing that I want it to be? And, you know, all the fears that come off of that, like the fear of rejection. So I think, you know, with losing yourself, it is also an element of accepting that, you know, these changes in our lives do happen, all right? And I think for me, for example, as well, there are some changes since OCD locked in that I have to sort of re-navigate with now. So because that internal terrain at times, it feels like it changed, I can't sort of navigate the world with the same faculties that I did before. So for example, with a dating and ROCD, I can't be so dialed into the way that I feel, because I know that OCD is going to call the shots there. So I try and judge it off of the pros and cons rather than feeling a certain way. You know, I've also accepted there's other things in my life that I can't really do in the way that other people may be able to do who don't have a doubting disorder, right? You know, there's some people out there who may be able to, you know, improve their sleep using certain behaviors or supplements or techniques without getting so feared or fused to it. And it's not just from a fear angle. I just know that in those moments when I do get obsessed with something, I have that propensity to go down that route. So it's probably easier and more beneficial for me not to engage in those behaviors. So you could say that maybe I you know, have lost that certain element you know, that certain element of maybe having those things that other people without OCD can have, right? I've got to be aware that I've got a doubting disorder, and there's going to be beliefs and behaviors and obsessions that maybe aren't going to be so beneficial for me given the brain that I've got, and I have to just stay away from going down that rigid path and putting things on pedestals, right? So I think just naturally OCD is going to change us. It's going to change our belief systems. It's going to change our behaviors. And, you know, but I wouldn't trade any of that for the world. You know, it makes you more confident. You realize the suffering and the depth that you can obtain from going through something which is as hard as OCD, and you can really bring that forward with you and propel that into other areas of your life, you know, whether it's work, whether it's relationship, having a more rational mindset towards things. So yeah, I think it's really important that, you know, if you are scared of losing yourself, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to say, you know, I've lost myself when we're this ever-changing and moving target. You know, the only real way in which you're going to lose yourself is if you didn't exist anymore. That would be the black and white way in which you lost yourself. But, you know, whilst you're still alive and conscious, the self is still there. Of course, it is very complex and intertwining, and there's lots of different things. But like I said, it's not about trying to find the self, because when you're trying to find, trying to find yourself, which is the opposite of losing yourself, that brings us into the compulsive path where you're trying to figure out certain aspects of yourself. Am I the sexuality that I think I am? Am I in the wrong relationship? Do I want to cause harm to people, etc.? And that just gives OCD a field day, right? So yeah, you've got to try and think of it in terms of not losing yourself. And I know it feels so real that you have, and it feels quite upsetting and disturbing and alien because you may be feeling these sensations, but it's not about whether you've lost or found yourself. It's just about becoming more rational about the worst case scenarios. And like I said, it's futile to say whether we've found or lost ourselves, because we're always a moving target, and by default, and growing older and being in the world and engaging in with the world, we're always gonna be adopting and discarding new traits and characteristics, and it's like a never-ending process. All right, so yeah, something to think about when you're on the OCD recovery journey.